Namaskar viewers, hello and welcome to this special broadcast on Sansad TV. I am Teena. After a very successful G20 Leaders Summit in New Delhi last month, India is now set to host the speakers of the parliaments of G20 countries next week. The Parliament 20 meeting will be held from the 12th to 14th of October in New Delhi next week, in which the presiding officers of the G20 countries as well as the invitee nations will attend the deliberations. The theme of the summit: Parliaments for One World, One Family, One Future, which draws inspiration from the ancient Indian philosophy of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, which means the world is one family. To talk about the priorities, the deliberations, the outcomes, the expectations of the P20 Summit, the Ninth P20 Summit to be precise, we have with us a very distinguished guest, the Ambassador of the Republic of Indonesia to India, Ms. Krisnamurthi. She will take us through the relevance of the P20 framework in bringing about a parliamentary dimension to global governance. Ambassador, thank you very much for your time. Delighted to have you with us on this broadcast on Sansad TV.
Thank you for having me.
Since the P20 meeting is just around the corner, let me begin by asking you first about the relevance and the significance of the P20 framework in fostering international collaboration, also in shaping active dialogues between nations in discussing the pressing global issues.
Firstly, congratulations to India, to successfully hosting such a tremendous big avenue for leaders to meet, which is the G20 Summit in September. And also I wish India the best for in the corner, right in the corner, the P20. I hope that it will be another successful event, another successful outcome. I believe that with that notion of the successful G20 Summit, the successful P20 Summit, it will show that the voice of the Global South will be heard throughout this year. Secondly, I would like to mention about what India has done throughout the presidency of G20. I think what India has done from December last year until now, today, is the pro-people, pro-planet and pro-prosperity. When we talk about pro-people, we need to talk about Parliament, because the representation of people is shown by the Parliament. Without involving Parliament into the implementation of such agreement as highest level of leaders, it will not be possible nationally. My third point, a working organization, a working engagement needs another pillar of engagement, which is Parliament. In ASEAN, for example, the regional organizations, in EU, they have also a European Parliament. So G20 must also include Parliament 20, because without it, it will not be relevant, it will not be working as a deliverables organization. So I think it is important for Indonesia. Like India, we are also a democratic country. Next year we will have same election, national election with India. For us, it's in February. So this engagement of Parliament 20 is very important to us, to have a concrete deliverables, concrete implementation of the agreement at the highest level of government.
So towards enhancing parliamentary diplomacy, as you said, it's very important for countries like India and Indonesia. If you could elaborate for us and our viewers some of the specific strategies that Indonesia advocates and promotes within the P20 framework?
The P20 Summit last year, when we have it, it's done in the global dynamics that is very unpredictable, uncertain. This year, we still also experience that. Without listening to constituents from other countries, other nations, we will not know what best for government, another pillar of democracy, will listen to. So I think what Indonesia has done throughout presidency last year, and also we commend what India has done in continuity and coherence framework of G20 engagement. It is important for us to translate what international agreements done to the national agreement. This is what we did last year, and I am pretty sure that India will do. Like, for example, last year we have the fund for pandemic, new fund for the pandemic. So without the support of the parliament, it will not be happening. Same like this year, when India promote LIFE, the LIFE, it will not be translated and supported by constituents if the Parliament 20 is not in discussion of such a excellent policy.
You know, it's important, and you make the right point that strengthening legislative approaches towards global challenges is extremely important, because it will effectively help in implementation. So, but before we move to the implementation bit, the question here is, the G20 countries have a diverse legislative landscape, and that also poses a significant challenge. What are some of the policies that G20 countries can adapt to ensure and encourage exchange of best legislative practices?
Okay, this is what I keep telling many people about criticism of G20. Some very negatively said G20 is not relevant. But for me, under the framework of international relations, whenever there is an engagement, whenever there is an avenue of people sitting together, trying to understand each other, is the best time of where the international policy works. If there is no engagement, there is no avenue, then we will not understand how, like I said over and over again, how international agreements will be translated into national policy. And you mentioned about the different system of each countries. It is very important to sit down and try to understand what are the challenges on each and every countries that sit down, because like for Indonesia, we have the parliament, we have the Senate, and we have the MPR. We call it Majelis Permusyawaratan Rakyat, which is together with Senate and parliament, which is different. So I think what we need to see in a positive manner, that any engagement in international relations, it is important to create a peaceful and diplomatic avenue for people to just sit and discuss and try to understand what are the challenges, individual challenges of the country, of the nations.
Now let me take you towards the implementation part, because most often what we see is that the agreements that are discussed and agreed upon at the G20, they have far-reaching consequences even for those countries that are not part of the G20. And therefore, it's important that parliamentary bodies have to be strengthened enough to ensure oversight, to ensure accountability in implementation of these agreements at G20. How do you think that can happen over time?
You know, I'm smiling because India has shown or given examples of, I keep mentioning about this, about what should G20 discuss, which is grassroots issues. Grassroots issues means constituent issues. So what India has done is taking it bottom up and up to bottom again. So it is good if we talk about life, but talks about from the culture of India and make it elevate to the leaders. It's good to talk about digital, but talking about India's experience with UPI. You know, you have done it already. So taking it from grassroots to up and then up to bottom again. G20 usually, if you see in the past, they talk only the high in the clouds issues and try to implement it. This presidency is different because the grassroots issues elevate to the leaders, and then going back again to implementation. So I think the creation of such a process is to make sure that the cohesiveness in the implementation, be it in the international level or national level, it's cohesive in some sort of a maybe sharing best practices, learning from each other, what are the flaws, what are the challenges, what hamper, but what are the potential. So it's quite different.
So in that context, do you think that the fact 4 years G20 presidency remaining with the developing countries is making a difference? It started with Indonesia last year, moving to India, Brazil, South Africa. So that bottom-up approach will see continuity?
I think so. Last year, we were in the post-COVID, we're trying to have stability post-COVID. So that's why we have that in mind. We as in Indonesia, we have that in mind. This year, India elevated what you experienced on the national level, on the grassroots level, you elevated. But then Brazil will take the baton and then learn from what Brazil has done with the Amazon, with the climate change especially. So it will be elevate from the bottom up. That is very important what Prime Minister said about making sure that the voice of Global South is heard, because Global South means grassroots. It's not about the higher decision-making process at the national level, but it's all about the interests of grassroots. Yeah.
You mentioned climate change. Both India and Indonesia are extremely vulnerable to climate change. The fact that it started with Indonesia's call on recover together, recover stronger, indicating that the world needs to come together to find solutions to all of these common problems. There's continuity when India says we need to progress to as one family, one future. The fact that climate change, public health, these are issues which remain at the center of the global issues. Both of us also have our own strengths in driving and harnessing global sustainability agendas. So how do you see India and Indonesia collaborating further together in ensuring that these issues which are affecting us directly remain at the center stage?
I think what India has done, again, I mentioned about commending what India has done with the continuity and cohesiveness and coherence, because if you see what we have done together or with many emerging economies, we talk about disasters in a very different way. It's not about only mitigation, but it's about adaptation. And India elevated to living with disasters. So I think what we have done together is it's about living with whatever happens with the surviving and thriving with the nature. That's very important. It's not about disaster only. Working group on disaster management is very important, and we commend India for that. And secondly, about what you mentioned, living together in one world. Sometimes we forget that oceans know borders, right? People always say tropical, subtropical, and things like that, differentiate geographically. But with the idea of Fasudaifa Kutumbakam, it becomes a whole without border. That the notion of a whole is very important in talking about climate change. You're not talking about tropical only. You're not talking about subtropical only. You talk about the whole, how we live and strive the current climate, which is changing rapidly.
Another important aspect of the G20 this year was inclusivity, and we saw how inclusion of different underrepresented voices was something that was at the core of the agenda. And by underrepresented voices, we don't just mean the countries, we also mean groups like women, like the minority groups. How do you see the P20 also walking that path in terms of having more women as policy makers, have more representation from the minority groups? What are the kind of efforts that will be required?
I congratulate India's fighting to get the 33%. So congratulations, that's such a big achievement under the circumstances of 1.42 billion people population. So it's I think the endeavors it seems relentless, but when you get it, 33%, it's like, we need to make an example of what you have done. But in Indonesia, we are 30% for the parliament. We are not there yet. It's another fight. But I think what, again, come back to the role of parliament is not so much of the representation in policy making process, but how to make sure that the vision of women-led development that becomes in reality concretely, because it is not about women empowerment per se. It's about how women can be the locomotive, can be in the middle, can be at the back, supporting the development itself. So the role of parliament, not only with the numbers, 33%, 30% on our side, it's about how their voices are heard in the policy making process. So that is very important.
When we talk about global challenges, apart from public health, we've just overcome the COVID pandemic, apart from the kind of geopolitical crisis that we are seeing, conflict resolution remains a key challenge for the world. Within the P20 framework, how do you see parliaments coming together to address issues of conflict resolution, of peace building across the world?
When you talk about parliament, I'm talking about Indonesia. I don't know about your system in detail, but in our system, the role of regional, local parliament is extremely important. So when we talk about P20 in the international context, international relations, that's why I mentioned about grassroots to up, because grassroots means also the local, regional parliament role in making sure that the policy is bottom up and then up down. It's very important that we are also talking about the local regional parliament. So on the conflict prevention resolutions, it is without a doubt in our system, the role of local parliament, regional parliaments are very significant, because they are the closest with the grassroots. Without their playing such a big role as the mother and father of the community, I think the peace building, conflict resolutions, it will not happen. So you talk about P20, yes, but like I said again, P20 will not be only in terms of emerging economies, emerging economies like us. It's not about the international relations only, but how to relate with the grassroots, which is the local, regional parliaments.
And in that aspect, another emerging challenge for countries like ours, both India and Indonesia, is that on one side, while technology has been an enabler of ease of living, it's also posed challenges of cybersecurity, of digital governance. So, if we look at from the context of both our nations, how do you see parliaments converging to address these challenges and the kind of crimes that then emanate from them?
Yeah, I remember in 2021, many diplomats, including myself and my friends, talking about our anxiousness that the digital will take over the job, the work of diplomats. But then again, we thrive and strive.
And we learn to coexist.
Yes, coexistence. So I think you rightly may be talking about cybersecurity, but at the same time, we also talk about the people inside the parliament, how the MPs learn how to create such a awareness that their work cannot be replaced by digital or AI or whatever kind.
Absolutely.
But at the same time, how to make digital more human, more approachable, more accessible, but at the same time taking also bearing in mind that there's need of a fence between human being and digital. So I think cybersecurity is very important in terms of understanding how to deal with it, but at the same time needs to deal with it in a wisely manner and without having concern on taking over the job of MPs in a way that the policy can be translated not only in the clouds, but also to grassroots. And there, I mentioned again about UPI. UPI is such a mind-blowing policy because I think I never seen, for example, a fruit vendor on the roads, on the street, using UPI in any other words.
You're right. It has completely transformed the lives of common citizens.
But does it replace the fruit vendor? No. That is why that's MP's job to make it aware that the human behind the digital is important, and on top of it, the security is not for the digital, it's for the human.
You're right. So technology that way has been an enabler of ease of living.
Yes.
And this is the kind of best practice that we want parliaments to encourage in exchange. We've spoken about the importance and the role of parliamentary dimension in global governance. But if I may now ask you about the G20 outcomes. The G20 summit happened last month. You were involved in a lot of earlier meetings as well that took place preceding the G20. Tell us about one of the best things that you found about India's G20 presidency, something that you think makes India stand out.
Cannot. I have many. I have many.
The one thing that remains in your memory.
One thing, I think this is, I don't know, maybe in the history of G20, any country, any presidency can achieve what India has done in holding 200 something meetings.
230 meetings, yes.
And 60 cities. I don't think in the history of G20 it will happen again. So I think that's the most, memorable in my work as ambassador here. And second, for sure, how India makes it local. You know, whenever we go, wherever we go, there's always local flavor in it, be it in the food, be it in the dance, be it whatever. So it's kind of a heartwarming to remember that, that path from December till now.
So do you think India succeeded in showcasing its rich history, rich culture to
no doubt about it. No doubt
to
about
the ambassadors?
No doubt about it. We are so blessed to be part of that.
One thing, and since I'm talking about India's rich history and culture, and because it's also one of the ways in which it connects India and Indonesia, we have rich cultural ties. I'm curious to ask you, Ambassador, you have a very Indian name.
Yes.
So is it because you have an Indian connection, or is it because of this that ancient India-Indonesia connection that you're talking about? Tell us and our viewers about the history of your name.
Maybe that is why my minister said, Ina, go to India because your name is so Indian. No, just joking. So my father's, Krisnamurthi is my father's name. My father is from Java, the island of Java. The old language of Java derived from Sanskrit. So that is why Krisnamurthi is his name. So I have no grandparents or grandparents from India, no, but only the name is Javanese language, so that is why.
Okay, thank you for giving those personal details about yourself. Let's now talk a bit about India and Indonesia and how our relationship has evolved. So we have that cultural bonding that you just spoke about, and of which your name is a classic example. But how have our relationships evolved over the decades?
Firstly, I think India has been our important partner since the 40s, the 50s, before the colonialism end in Indonesia. One of the countries that recognized our independence is India, even before anyone else. India helped us in the UN to get the independence. So since 40s and 50s, we are already close. But during COVID, India helped us with the vaccine. One of the few that helped us with the vaccines, which we are so thankful. But after COVID, we are kind of a take off in an excellent way to translate the 2018 comprehensive strategic partnership between us into reality. Since last year and this year, we have done, the embassy has done hundreds MOUs between schools and universities. We have done sister hospitals agreements with many hospitals in India and also Indonesia. And for the first time in the history, we have a Commodore for defense attaché, one-star general. It's the first time in the history. So many achievement has been done post-COVID. And then, thank God, this year we managed to have 3 direct flights, India to Indonesia. Well, a lot of achievements in that regard. The framework of mind that I have since I arrived last year, January, is that we need to make connection between the past, the present, and the future. We always talk about the past. 2,000 years ago, religion, culture, very strong relations. And then the 40s, 50s. So we talk about the past. We tend to forget about the present and again, ignoring the future. So that is why since I arrived, I always focus on connecting the past, the present, and the future.
So if you look towards building a stronger future, where do you see India-Indonesia relations progressing from new comprehensive strategic partnership?
For ASEAN also we elevate, because our chairmanship of ASEAN this year, 30 years of relations between ASEAN and India. So we want the elevation is not only about bilateral, but as well as regional. So ASEAN and India also have comprehensive strategic partnership. This will help us building the building blocks that we want, which is P2P and then pro-prosperity, so pro-people, pro-prosperity, and pro-planet.
Absolutely. So we hope that relationships continue to elevate between India and Indonesia. And as the ambassador rightly said, we need to take on from the past, build on the present, and look towards a progressive future. We hope the India-Indonesia relationship will continue to progress that way. So that having been said, we'll have to wind up the program. Time allows me to take only that much on this edition of the broadcast on Sansad TV. Thank you, Ambassador. It's been a delight speaking to you about a whole range of issues, starting from P20 to G20 and how we can elevate India-Indonesia ties.
All
It's
the
been
best
wonderful
to
having you
India
on Sansad
P20.
TV. Thank you. Thank you very much. So that's it from us, viewers, on this special broadcast. Thank you very much for your time as well.